Hey all, I'm Alan from PERC. Today, we're going to have a conversation about processing and co-ferments and the future of processing in Colombia with uh, the producer in Colombia and try to get a better understanding of some of these conversations that we're all having that should involve all people in the whole supply chains. I'm PERC CEO. I'm a big brewing nerd. If you've been in the Reddit uh, pour over subreddits and part of those conversations, that's it's usually me that you're talking with. I am not a roaster or sourcer by trade, but I love all of the stuff in these coffees. So that's where I am in this conversation. Lucas.
I am Lucas Cuadros, one of the owners of Unblended Coffee, which is an exporting company out of Colombia that works as an incubator for young coffee producers and farmers. I help them build a brand that resonates in the end consumer.
And Andres Martinez. I'm the user, and also I am a biochemical engineer that works processing coffee and teaching how to processing coffee. So the other producers. So I'm very glad to be here and also glad to explain all the details about processing all the questions you have about this topic.
So we've sourced your coffees. In fact, we were just downstairs at World of Coffee Brewing, some of your Floritura, and coffees that come from everywhere else in the world except Colombia. We would have your farm name printed on the bag or the washing station printed on the bag. But unique to Colombia, it says Andres Martinez on the bag. Why is it something that happens in Colombia, nowhere else?
Yeah, I think Lucas is the person that can explain more details about that because he's the responsible. That's Martinez names in the US and yeah, becomes famous among the consumers, so you can explain better that.
That is an important, let's see how much context we want to answer here. So there are a couple of things that happen. One is due to the geography of Colombia. I think I may be wrong, but I think Colombia is the country where there's a perfect farm size where the owner of the farm can be relevant to the like they can produce lots just enough in size where it matters to them that level of craft by individual farmer or producer. Countries that have larger farms or more traditional coffee with tough to answer the question. I don't know. The truth is that I don't know. The one thing is that the farms in Colombia allow themselves to be just enough where that matters. Like in Africa, the farmers are very small, so doesn't really make sense. And in Brazil, the farms are too large. They're being inherited, so there's a larger legacy built around the brand of the farm. In the parallel, same case for servicing documents. But I think that this started picking on being more relevant when coffee as a product business started to be more relevant when roasters like PERC started pushing e-commerce harder. So how I see the specialty coffee business is there are two businesses: coffee as an ingredient in a drink. That was kind of like the second and third wave. How good the coffee was is important, but it wasn't the main decision driver. And then once the COVID happened, e-commerce started to become a more important channel. Then consumers needed to buy without trying the coffee. So signifiers as the name of the producer, the processing, the flavor notes, they started to become decision drivers. And that reinforced the name of the producer and signifiers of quality. So I think it's both the rise of our home brewing and e-commerce what has made that relevant.
I think there's a lot that comes with the the branding around a producer too, and I definitely want to get to some more of that in a little bit. Um, I do want to start at the very basics of processing, and I'm going to give my very, very basic understanding, and you tell me where I'm missing something. At its core, coffee is a fruit with seeds inside of it that we ultimately want to get to those seeds that are dried as a means of preservation, to transport them. So we got to warehouse them, get them to another place at another time where we can then roast them. And just like we dry lots of other produce and meats to preserve it, we do the same with coffee. That's the end goal, right? So there's the kind of the natural process, dry process, where the fruit gets left out to dry, with the seeds inside. We remove the fruit and we have the dried seeds, and that takes kind of a long time, right? And then a shortcut in time to getting to that dried seeds is to remove the fruit from around the seeds. But then there's a sticky layer, a mucilage, right? That is coating the seeds, and people figured out a long time ago that if you allowed a little bit of time to go by, that something happened that broke down that mucilage, and then it's easier to wash that away. And we call this the wash process. You're washing that mucilage off, and then you can dry the seeds. And that whole process takes less total days from start to finish than the natural process. Is that
Beautiful.
okay? And we figured out much, much more recently, right, that what's responsible for breaking down that mucilage is some form of microbiome, and that if we control the environment around that microbiome, we can select for different microbes, and they, as a result, can leave different byproducts behind that can change the flavor of the coffee. It leaves behind some compounds that can survive the whole drying process and 400 degrees of roasting. Is that also about right? Okay. That's the basics. Over the past, let's call it 10 years, how has processing evolved from the wash process being a means of just expedient arrival of a dried seed to what we're seeing now? How has it evolved, and what has changed?
Yeah, I think that changed a lot. I started in coffee processing 6 years ago, and but I know I started with coffee. I started with beer. I used to make beer, craft beer in the university. So all my university, I studied yeast, how to improve the yeast to make beer, wine, and alcoholic products. When I started coffee, was really new the topic about fermentation. So everyone's have point of view of fermentation, and 6 years ago we already have some crazy profiles like funky coffees, like carbonic maceration, like all these things. So in that time, everyone wants to know what is behind a fermentation, and there is a start like more people concerned about the different techniques of processing. So I remember that at that time, keep processing, teaching how to make honey, how to make wash, how to make naturals. But they are also interested in the people that was talking about double fermentation, putting yeast from other like beer or wine into the coffee, uh, putting uh, other, like for example, artificial flavors, or for example, like citric acid into the coffee. So in that time, many people was like talking about different techniques of fermentation. Like for example, also in that time, I remember people speak about double aerobic, thermal share, all the things that was, or that sounds also very interesting, but no one's know how to make it, because if, for example, right now, if you go to Colombia has many producers doing different things. Like if you go, for example, Huila, Cauca are the main departments, or even Quindío, that are doing different things, like different processes. So changed a lot. So, for example, if we talk about in this conversation, we are going to talk about co-fermentation and infuse. For example, I think that infuse is a word that gained bad reputation because from many years, people when it's talking about infused coffee was talking about bad coffee, like, oh, you have infused coffee, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. So in some point, people start hearing about co-fermentation, and this word sounds more soft, more beautiful. So many people that used to make infused coffees, like putting flavors on coffee, when they start hearing about co-fermentation, they say, okay, this word sounds better. So let's put this word in our coffees and let's try to sell co-fermented coffees. And this is, for example, something that used to know a lot. That many of these people that start learning about 10 years ago about processing realize that just the processing is not able to change the flavor of the coffee in the strong ways. So they just start like, okay, doing the easy way. And what is the easy way right now? It's flavoring coffee. But for example, this topic of flavoring coffee have different things that are not transparent in the way. And for example, for processing coffee, you can speak about different techniques, but you cannot use all these different techniques to cover that you are, for example, using flavor or artificial flavor for change the flavor of the coffee, or even artificial. We can use some fruits, some herbs, but in this processing, many people is not transparent with this. So yeah, I think that processing is a big field to speak, and also is a lack of information that are having, for example, the importer, the roasters, the consumers, is a lack of information that don't allow understand very well what is happening. It's like, for example, you can hear from your import, from the exporters or from the producers some receipt, but if you receive this receipt, you need to trust about the receipt because you don't have the way to confirm that is the real thing that they are doing in the farm. And if you try to ask to them is good or what is the details on the receipt, they just will say, okay, this is like my receipt. I can share with you all the details because I will lose my receipt. In this excuse, many people can hide what is the real they are doing on the coffee. And maybe this is a lack of information that we are also worried about it because you as a consumer, as important as a roaster, you need to also know what do you need to tell to the customer because many customers are worried about my coffee. I'm drinking strawberry coffee, but is a strawberry co-fermented or is a strawberry infused or is bought. So because also something that is happening is that, for example, when you make a coffee processing, you have like many chemical compounds that are involved in this process. So that makes that, for example, for coffee that is infused, if you don't know what his people is doing, you are having a lack of information on what this coffee contains. Can contains chemical compounds that don't affect your health, can contain chemical compounds that could affect your health, but you don't know because you are not receiving this information. So for me, in processing, is very important to know all the details, but also that requires that the roaster, the importers, the final consumers understand with more knowledge what is behind. Because right now it's easy to attack. You are selling co-fermented or infused coffees, but you also need to know what is behind that, and you need to understand that it's not easy for a roaster or for an importer to know all the details. Because, for example, me as a producer, I can tell to you, this is the history, but it's true. You need to trust in my history because it's my history and I know what I'm doing with the coffee. You cannot go to the farm and check every detail and see, oh yeah, you are doing in the same way that you are telling to me, you are doing this. So this lack of information is very difficult for the roaster share to the customer. So in some point, this customer will say, "Hey, you are saying to me that you have this coffee, but some of them can feel uncomfortable because many of them can know the truth about the coffees, but this lack of information is very difficult to feel because it's something that depends on trust from the producer side, and this trust you need to transfer to your customer, but you cannot prove or you cannot prove that this is truly the process, you know. And yeah, maybe I am talking too much in no specific thing. I'm not talking about processing, but I think if I start talking about processing, it's more complex, it's more chemical, it's more something that's more difficult to understand. But if you want, we can also.
Basically, what I'm understanding, it connects to your point. Earlier, maybe you were well for recording, but um, it's a difficult conversation when processing started being so complex. So it's easy to understand for somebody to watch and natural. But as the consumers became more and more interested in being amazed by new that's brought, I think, by the rise of at home brewing, any commerce, what's new, pushed the producers in Colombia being organized or having a harvest every month with the ability to change and experiment more often, naturally led to a group of people being innovators in fermentation. And this is also something that's very, very new. The paper that I sent you was published like in 2015. So only 2015 papers like were able to put into words like academic papers. But what was going on that was giving coffee different flavors. So back to the topic of consumers wanting more and more new stuff, more flavor, and producers experimenting with the point of the cherry to the drive, it became way more complex. So what Andres is referring to is that transparency more than a one-sided conversation from the producer all the way to the consumer. It takes an engagement, an active conversation both ways because we need the roaster to be invested in understanding all the complexities and the consumer eventually too. But and the producer can then tell enough information without giving away the recipe, that's what I was referring to, and still be very transparent on the things that were to the process of the coffee. So it needs to be from the producer, from the roaster. You need to come Colombia or the process and understand what goes on. So if he has enough context, a lot of conversation about it, and then from the producer to communicate not the steps because that's the recipe, but what it has, so people can make informed decisions as consumers. That's a way to summarize it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So we see more and more coffees that the coffee itself or the process itself is developing a bit of a brand name. So we saw you mentioned thermal shock, a while ago, and yeah, that was its own almost brand as a process. Or the one that we saw a lot of that you're very familiar with is the MO3, right? The MO3 as a process is I can't tell all of the steps of it, right? But people know what that coffee tastes like, and they'll purchase it as a result. Um, I think what gets interesting. So we had at the same time, so from Parisa the MO3, which had cinnamon, flavor to it, and we had from Sebastian Ramirez the cinnamon coconut, which also had cinnamon flavor. So two coffees that were achieving flavor very, very differently, although a similar flavor, right? I guess what to drive this same point home a little further. One, roaster for you as an importer, what questions should we even be asking to a producer to understand which of those approaches someone to arrive at a flavor? And then what information should we expect is fair for a producer to share? I mean, that MO3 is unique, and that's why people I think flock to it. We shouldn't expect yeah that to be something that's reproduced elsewhere without because they gave up the entire.
Well,
Mm, yeah, I think it's something that depends on the producer sides, how much transparency wants to give it to you.
Mhm.
In my personal opinion, or in my personal philosophy of the business, is trying to give you the transparency and you can choose. Because of that, this is my portfolio of coffee is like you can choose. You depends on your philosophy and depends on customers what they want. If you want to grab some co-fermented coffees, okay, this is the information. If you want to grab some infused with artificial flavors, this is the information. If you want to grab some processing coffees, real things like real teas, real processing behind that, this is the coffees. If you want to clean coffees like the traditional ones, this is the coffee. You can decide what do you want according what your customers wants to buy. Because if I do that, is because my philosophy is try to offer all the things that you can grab from one side. And in that way, I can give you all the information that you need. But sometimes you have different suppliers that they cannot do that because they build their reputation on, for example, on war on in one or in they build reputation in some point that they need to preserve that so they can give some information what they are doing. So it's difficult to find like it's difficult to find suppliers that really wants to deliver all the information for you. So in that case, I think that more on what is the philosophy of the company. If the philosophy of your company is buy coffee and request the information that the producers want to give in to you, and then you share with your customers, and your customer like it, and they keep buying, I think that is enough. But if your philosophy is buy the coffee, but have much information as possible, and then giving to your customer this information, this is other type of philosophy. So it's different things, and I think that depends on the producer and the roaster. What are their philosophy about? Because as I tell you before, it's not easy uh, for the roasters have all the information, and also it's not easy for the producer giving all the information. I do because it's my philosophy. It's like, I feel good doing that. I feel good explaining the details, explaining the process, explaining the portfolio because it's my philosophy. But other producers or other farms are not comfortable with that because they have other approach or other philosophy for business. So in that case, for me, depends on the what do you expect and what do you want to like communicate with your customers at the end, and depends on that you can uh, know what or how much amount of information you want to give to your customer, because in some cases also it's very confusing. But you, for example, request too much information, so for example, some farm that make really fun fermentations, and then you have a misunderstanding of the information, and then you transfer to the customer this information, they will say, "I feel confused." So I cannot feel safe, or I cannot feel confident to buy this coffee because you give me too much information, and I'm not understanding well. So in that case, is for me it depends of the objective of your company, of your consumers and the final consumer.
What questions do you ask, Lucas, to producers when, because ultimately it's
Right.
from you that we get the information. So how do you think about what questions you ask producers of what their process was, or how to, I guess, categorize coffees even?
We've been using uh, the co-fermented term, I think, in a way that most of the industry is using. But it's a word that feel like could fit, for food. As the consumers have been pushing for more transparency, I think this is the Reddit community pushing for it, and heard from roasters specific questions about, hey, for real, like what's in this coffee. Then we've become more strict with asking. Uh, Before that, we were trying to protect the intellectual property of the producers' ideas and recipes. But now I think it's making a disservice to the industry. And I think it's a lot of change. This push from the consumer is very recent. I think it's from end of last year, and then it has sort of like grown this year into more people at least. Also, I feel like the industry as a whole uh, has been shifting away from these strong flavors, and then it's shifting more towards washed and clear process, to the degree that Sebastian Rodriguez has a new farm just for clean and wash process. Unlike Martinez, most of his portfolio is washed clean, although using, some of the things learned from the government slash infuse and fermentations to 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 do fermentations and boost flavor in a cleaner way. So to answer your question, yeah, we recently had a meeting with all the producers 3 weeks ago, and we came to the conclusion that we're going to push. No, we already do this. We push for the producer name to be a brand, and what we want is a brand that lasts for a long time. And how you do that? It's by leading up to your morals and standards. So if you lie, then that's doing a disservice for your own personal brand. So that's a big first conclusion. Then second, we are going to decouple from the uh, quality signifiers of processing, like thermal shock, co-fermented, infuse, because those signifiers change with time, right? building a brand, your personal brand is more timeless. So when you have a personal brand, you can propose new products like Captura brand. That's it. That's not the name of a process. It's a name that is gave or Andres Cardona, Red Sunset, or Luna Azul. Those things don't are not part of a larger conversation about processing. They're Andres Martinez from his personal brand proposing a new flavor to the market. What we are expecting from producers that we work with is to say what is included in this one. We ask for a step by step, but we understand that there are some things that need to be protected in order to not get all people to copy exactly the same. But we expect that if anything is included, then we say so we communicate properly, uh, like thermal shocking, as playing right, infrared, as is green vibration. So we're changing our portfolio and our website and our marketing kits to reflect that, and going away from names that have the name of the producer and then the name of the process for the name of the producer and the name that they choose to name their products. So we're having the producers think about their brand and how they want to present their products with a product name that they choose. That is how we're thinking about. But it's also
I love that, and then, of course the Red Sunset and the Luna Azul. Yeah, those are some of the first coffees that we brought in that were like that. And actually, a fun fact: our bag design, our creative. Those the first bags he designed were for the Red Sunset, the Luna Azul. No, Brad. And yeah. So those coffees had a special place in our heart. But those are unique process. It's two coffees that can't exist without the other. Byproducts of one make the other, which is really neat. But even with that, the Luna Azul tasted like blueberry Jolly Ranchers. Half our blue raspberry Jolly Ranchers. How do again we still communicate? This is something that happened because of more typical. It's still advanced processing. He's still doing a lot to it, but there wasn't flavor added to it, or there wasn't co-fermentation step in that specific. How do we delineate that, or have a common language between Andres Cardona, between you and us, where this is a wash or a traditional process, or this is a this is a co-ferment and this is fusion.
Ultimately, we have to align from the end consumer back, because that's what drives is an industry. The end consumer needs to have signifiers of quality. They need to go to a shop or go to an online shop and see a very short amount of information and make a decision, an informed decision. So how do you communicate that best? I think it's actually the role of the roaster, right? I think so. Our solution to that problem, to how do we convince the end consumer, was what I just mentioned. We push the name of the producer as a brand that's timeless. We let the producer create and promote a portfolio, and we request to disclose if it has something added or a specific thing that is not. It does require context, like the consumer needs to know what's common and what's not common, and the roaster also. In tasting and in actually understanding processing basics to know what's like a rehydration is not common.
Mm-hmm.
Right? At least never that common, because it's drying and then putting it back with the dryers. Not common. And But also as a consumer, you need to be like, this coffee tastes like bubble gum. That is not common. It's never going to be common in a process like that. So it requires building context from both words. And the problem is that this is very, like, this hasn't been, we're talking about months scope of time. And I think 2 years ago or last year, there was a big controversy between infused and non-infused coffees around barista championship. And producers were giving were being put on the wrong side of history on that one, and was causing a lot of divide in the industry. People in Panama actually got together and created like prohibited infused, and they started to show to like a pin that said non-infused coffee, and they started creating merch. So it was kind of divided because, to be frank, it was putting the competition and seeing an unfair level. But then some, industry thought leaders like Glenn Howard or important barista champions, innovators. That's when I think the term co-fermented got introduced. And then the SCA ruled in favor of if the flavor was added during the fermentation of the coffee, then it's legal. And that's how the co-fermented sort of like started gaining traction. And people like Sebastian Ramirez, he adds flavor when it's fermented, right? And then it shows. It shows. Like there are some infused coffees after drying, they taste very different. Yeah. Where was I going with this?
Yeah, so it's still about common language and
Yeah. So it requires context on both sides. But ultimately, it's, I think, a team effort, like what we're doing here. And we have to have in mind that what we want is how do we grow the context of the end consumer as a team? And how do we come up with a marketing language that convinces the end consumer to buy more? Because that's what moves the industry. If you sell more of these coffees, then we sell more, he sells more, and then we all win. And the consumer wins too. Because he gets incentivized to create more stuff, better stuff that's already what the consumer wants and needs. So our proposal 3 weeks ago was to do that, like let the producer create a portfolio and make their own products. But what do you think as the market, person for PERC? And with all your experience in e-commerce, what do you think? How do you think we solve this issue?
Yeah, no, it's it is very much a moving goalpost is kind of the expression for this, I think, where some of the questions, even, and in fact, we should take a step back and still define what a co-ferment even is, and what an infusion.
But haven't.
Right. But we're talking about these infusion co-ferments, and the timeline on this, I just had to look this up the other day. I think our first co-ferment that we brought in we released it in January of 2023, and that was a passion fruit co-ferment from Hararse, and that was early in co-ferment days, and that felt contentious. We debated internally, should we be bringing a co-ferment? Is this specialty coffee? What is this? And where we landed on our continued plan is that it was coffee that was really interesting we were excited to taste it, and we wanted other people to have the opportunity to taste it. But we also wanted to tell them this is a co-ferment. We want to highlight the process and what's happening as much as possible. And earlier this week, we just released a coffee that was the first time we put strawberry flavor coconut, and calling it is flavored coffee. And that doesn't diminish our desire to source that coffee. It did not. And we still sold out the same day. But people came into it knowing what they were getting, and that's what's important to us, is figuring out how do we make sure that people understand what they're getting and that they're making informed decision. And this is not we're not going to solve this today. Even if we say anything that had flavor added at any point, that we call that an infusion, and maybe that is the answer for today. Processing's evolving so fast right now that we're going to be asking a different question 3 months from now that we didn't even think about today. And even you talked about clean, wash, process. For me at this point, if I just see wash, process on coffee, I feel like I'm missing so much information, because what was the temperature when it was fermenting? How long did it ferment? These are pieces of data that we now have for almost every coffee, and when you're missing that, and it informs how the coffee's gonna taste, it feels like there's something missing. So does the wash process, as a term, even go away? Do we have to come up with some other way of describing differences in how long it fermented, or the environment in which it fermented? Always. But
I think honestly, that is when we think about team building, like how would we collaborate? I think that's the magic that her and roasters like yourselves will bring to the table or bring to the table. Is it how do you digest all this wealth of information into something that literally comes down to a sentence that tells the end customer just enough for them to make their right decision on how to what they want. And then when they buy it, feel like they're getting on the help they're getting.
yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's there. I think there's a little bit of emotion. You talked about this with early co-ferments, that the notion of co-fermenter, or particularly a flavoring infusion, is meant to cover up poor quality coffee. And the coffees that we're buying it's not something that that seem like poor quality coffees that are covering something up. These are really great coffees that are inherently sweet. They're inherently clean. They have some kind of unique properties. And then sometimes they have an added component that just elevates some part of them, right? Or maybe achieves a flavor or adds a flavor that couldn't, happen elsewhere. And I think that's really interesting. So if you're willing, explain maybe the origin of co-ferment. Why in the world would you put fruit in a fermentation tank in the first place while coffee is going through the wash process? What purpose would that serve?
The purpose of food,
Mm-hmm.
fruits like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep. Just fruits. Why in the world would you put fruits in a tank with a coffee while the mucilage is fermenting?
It's on the coffee. For example, in the particular case of Colombia, we have a lot of fruits. We have a lot of fruits because Colombia is have a great diversity of agricultural some fruits, and it's very cheap. And when people start putting fruits on coffees, because they start seeing that one fruit can change the flavor. For example, if we use blackberries, passion fruit, coconut, if you start using this type of fruit, you will see that the flavor will change. And if you see, for example, it was very common that 3 weeks ago when we were in the camp of Unblended, we make groups of different people to process coffee. Everyone wants to develop that flavor, and the perception was using fruits. We want to use lemon, we want to use orange, we want to use mandarin, we want to use, because right now is one of the easiest ways to have different flavored coffee. And in Colombia, for example, is very cheap using some fruits, citrus, like for example, uh, mangoes, like something that we have a lot and it's very cheap. So right now it's very common that you find these people doing that, and even I'm doing that, and I have some coffees that have fruits, other coffees have herbs, because it's very common, and we start doing that because change the flavor in a good way that the consumers like it. You try lemongrass in the coffee, it's good. If you try chamomile in coffee, it's good. If you try rosemary in coffee, it's good flavor. So if we use that, is because we've seen that when people try these coffees, they feel something nice, something different that they can bow and they can say, "Oh, this coffee is good." So yeah, right now it's very common that you can find this on the producer side.
And if you're in Colombia, there's mangoes everywhere. You pick a bunch of mangoes, put them in the tank. Will the coffee just taste like mango? For that?
No, no. This is something also important. Understand? It's many fruits, but for example, in some cases, are very wave things. For example, it's very common that people they start saying, "Oh, this is lychee co-ferment,"
Mm-hmm.
but in Colombia, don't grow the lychee. Peach co-fermented. But if you really make a co-fermentation with peach, it's like you will taste nothing. I sent to make analysis in South Korea. For example, I find that the peach concentration of some coffees is more high grade than the peach fruit. How you can explain that? So some fruits that you can find easily in the market, like blueberries, more expensive than coffee, but you still find blueberry flavor in coffee.
Mhm.
Or even a strawberry is little high price, but it's affordable. But if you ferment it with strawberry, you will feel a fermented flavor. It's very dense. It's very nutty chocolate. But when you taste a real co-fermented, it's different that you are, for example, many times you're receiving as a co-fermented.
Mm.
So to give you a bit of context, I don't know if you had a chance to read the paper, but only a few aromatic compounds diffuse into the flavor into the bean, and they get translate when they get roasted. Not all of them. Citrus, leaves, and aromatic leaves do. So that's why at the camp we did a blend of like we took leaves from oranges and
You already tried.
we've done it before and it translates super well, but we haven't tasted those. But doing of these, the lemongrass, and then putting the orange peels, not the fruit, peels, because if you put the fruit, the acid will lower the pH, lower the pH, and kill the bacteria and the yeast. The peels are very high, and that translates into the roasted coffee reception. But the fruit has a lot of sugar. So if you put banana, mango, so and then the sugar will increase the fermentation, and then not only those very volatile compounds don't translate into the roasted coffee, but also that fruit would increase the bacterial growth and the yeast growth that would take over with their own compounds and create flavors like acetic acid or what are the flavors that creates that fruit, either more chocolate,
Yeah,
wine, or
use this happens. Yeah, it's very common. And yeah, this is for example, you want to know what is the real flavor of co-fermented. You need to make a cooperative work between, for example, in this case, you and us. Okay, we can start trying. This is the co-fermentation of strawberries, co-fermentation of mangoes, the co-fermentation of peach. Try and then compare with what you were receiving as a sample for co-fermentation from other stacks. That could be a useful tool to start understanding what is the difference. And this is the future of the collaboration. You can start receiving what is the real thing, and you can compare with the other market what you're receiving from other producer or other farms. And this is, for me, is the more easiest way to have really transparency. Because if you know what is behind that coffee, then you can compare. If you don't know, you can receive any information and you only need to trust in the information. So the future maybe could be that work more close between roaster and producer and understand transparency quality.
Yeah, that is it. That is it. That is it. Because ultimately, I feel like supply chains are shorter and shorter and going swift, switching away from a line to a circle, like a round table. And we're working towards the same goal, which is how do we sell more together? Like we see our role starts when you get a call, not doesn't end there. Like our success is ultimately we're as successful as you are selling the coins that you bought from us. Is that it? So it goes like this.
Yeah.
So then when it goes back, is that when you learn that with those variables, how can we what can we do as a team to sell more? Because that's in better. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So we put mangoes in the tank. Talk about the taste like mango. If you put mangoes or glucose in the tank, does the outcome change, or do the mangoes just provide all the yeah, I guess a sugar fructose source for the microbes?
I think that the main problem, example by co-fermented coffees, is that when you heard about fruit, you imagine the flavor of fresh fruit. But for example, if you eat strawberry co-fermentation, you remind the fresh flavor of the fruit. So when you cup and you feel, you say, yeah, this is what is strawberry taste. But you don't thinking about what is the flavor when the fruit is fermented, or when the fruit is destroyed by roasting. You don't imagine that, because we always think about the moment that we are tasting lychee co-fermentation. We think of the lychee flavor and we say, yeah, this tastes like lychee. So we don't mind if the flavor lose or something like that. The same thing happened with the mango. If you put a mango in the fermentation tank, you will imagine that the fresh flavor will transfer and you can say, oh yeah, this is very tropical. But at the end, example, like Lucas say, mango, the flavor of mango are very low. Really, really low. It's like 0 point something. So it's very low because the flavor of mango comes more from the sweetness. So sweetness is the real strong thing in mango. And you can transfer sweetness on coffee. It's really difficult. If you put 1 kilogram of sugar on 1 kilogram of coffee, you will have sweetness or high sweetness because this didn't work in that way. So the same fruits like mango, like for example, peach, that is very famous profile. Everyone say that they are making peach co-fermented, but if you are going to do the experiment and run the experiment, and this is that usually I do it, like I use the like the maximum quantity that I can use per kilogram of coffee and see if it's possible that the flavor transfer. Like I made experiments with 1 kilogram of peach and 1 kilogram of coffee. It's like you cannot put more than 1 kilogram of peach because if you put more than 1 kilogram of peach, it will be triple or 4 times the cost of the coffee. Because 1 kilogram of peach in Colombia is like $4. And how much costs 1 pound of coffee is $3 per pound. So it's more expensive the fruit than the raw material that you want to transfer the flavor. If you do that experiment, you will see that this flavor don't transfer to the coffee. It's very low, and you feel and you don't feel the flavor. You feel maybe a little winey, a little fruity, but you don't feel like the peach wings that you expect that taste the coffee.
Where does the peach ring flavor? Because we've gotten peach rings and a few flavor and a few coffee. Where does that come from?
The peach flavor mainly come from some compounds that we know as lactones. Lactones are the chemical compounds responsible of peach flavors. So when you feel this peach intense flavor in coffee, it's 100% that is natural because it's very, very difficult. Even for me that I am research about how to produce the small flavors from fruits. And we taste today the banana flavor. The banana flavor was like very easy to recreate in the lab because it's just an ester of like ester that you only need to combine alcohol with acetic acid, and you produce an ester. It's very easy. But if you want to create a lactone, you have a more complex ester that requires more complex chemistry. So in the chemical way, it's possible to do, but in the biochemical way, it's really difficult to do. So when someone speak about, oh, I'm creating the peach flavor in the fermentation tank, it's like, we're really doing that because, and I have 5 years trying to do it, but I can't do it. So it's like, you know,
Yes.
it's really difficult to understand. And the consumers and, for example, the roaster, they didn't know about it because they trust that the pitcher say, we are creating the peach flavor through fermentation. And you say, yeah, that makes sense. And you say to the customer, yeah, they are doing the fermentation, but it's real.
Are there any other flavors that are either really easy or really hard to produce?
Yeah.
Watermelon is really easy or hard?
Watermelon, yeah, it's hard. It's hard. Because, for example, in some cases, the flavor of a fruit not only depends on one compound, depends on 5, 10, 20 compounds. So if you want, for example, in the case of the basil that we are talking about, banana is one component, but tastes like a banana. Yeah, banana candy will be tasting like a banana candy. But if we are going to more complex flavor, watermelon, flavors, even if you imagine the fruit, for example, a watermelon, if you imagine the fruit, it's like the flavor is very low, really, really low. You cannot feel the flavor, even, for example, in a watermelon, because it's very low. But if you try a coffee that says watermelon unfermented, it's like you smell and wow, it's more strong than the fruit. In these cases, we need to like have a real point of for make the comparison. Right. This is what I'm talking to you about. We need to have like a cooperative work between the roaster, the importer, the, the seller, and the producer. Like I can try to teach you this is the way that we produce this flavor, the way that this coffee, the way that, and then you can understand better, and then you can told to your customer in the most easy way. That as you mentioned before, we put this one is the flavor strawberry, and some people will buy it, and other people will not. But I think that the thing that, for example, as any customers, it's like if you are a customer of something, the most or the thing that make that you get angry or get you mad for something is when you feel cheated.
Yeah.
And this is the point. And why you feel cheated? Because the thing that you are buying feel that something is wrong, and you feel that something is not telling, or the full story is not telling. So you feel cheated, and then you feel mad. And this is the problem. If you don't feel cheated by the person that is selling to you something, and you like it, you will buy it because you are expecting that. As you mentioned before, we're expecting that. If you're expecting that, no problem. But if you are not expecting that, this is a problem. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. Lucas, any other final thoughts?
No. I mean, and we could do what we talked about the other day. People were interested in going to Colombia, and there's more to do their class.
Like roasters, or yeah, consumers can that they can understand how we process and makes more. I think that the thing that we need to create is a environment that you can trust, and you can feel like you can feel. I don't know how to say that. You can feel quiet. I don't know if quiet is
Confident, maybe?
yeah, confident. Yeah, confident. But you can feel confident with your final customer. That you are selling the real product, the product that has the transparency that the customer wants to receive. Because at the end, it's not uh, about if I feel good or not feel good with my customers. And this is very important, even for example, for the brands. If my brands want to be recognized as a honest brand that transfer or that communicate all the things good, maybe that could make me feel better. And for example, for me, and I feel good when I can speak with the customers with the truth. It's like I can relieve all the pressure that other don't have. Like, telling 100 these stories to cover something. It's more easy for me. Okay, this is the way. It's too honest, maybe. This is my way to feel good with my customer, because in some point I understand that this is not just a relation of buyer and seller. It's also a relation of friendship. And I build many friends in this industry that I feel bad if I telling to their lives. And I don't want to feel like that. So this is why I'm trying to do that. And also I'm trying to teach to other people what is the like the truth behind it.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you both for your time and being really open and candid about all this. I appreciate it. I think it's really interesting. I hope that some other folks had some questions answered. I mean, clearly have a long way to go to finding common language, but I think my takeaway is we just need to be really deliberate about talking with an important producer and asking the questions really specifically that we think our customers want to know about what was involved in the process of this, and just trying our best to continually update that even as processing evolves again over the next. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Alan.